Welcome to Macros and Math, part 4 of the series Duxbury Braille Translator, from first pedal to flocking flying, and I am now going to turn it over to Kyle DeJute. Kyle, take it away.
Thank you, Leanne. I am excited to be flying away as pilots of Duxbury. I was going to say absolute experts, but that is something that isn't usually true. We never become absolute experts. There is always more to learn. So today we are talking about macros and math. Yes, we're talking about math. Yes, we're talking about macros or shortcuts. And we're going to touch on a couple of other things along the way. So I want you to know, as always, that we are open to questions. You are here probably because you read the description, and if you are watching this recording, it is available to you in the description area for this webinar. I am Kyle DeJute. I will be talking at you a lot today. I like to say that my official title at APH of Braille Trainer is sort of an excuse for me to push up my nerd glasses about Braille codes to anyone who will listen. It is also an excuse for me to explore how software programs work and what training and study opportunities are available related to Braille transcription, and then share that information as best I can. So I am Kyle. We are here. We are moving on. And we are starting with gathering yet more information from you. What we'd love to know is today, is there any macro or math in which you are particularly interested? The answers are yes. I have typed it in the chat, which is a hint. And the other answer is no. I am interested generally. I want to give you plenty of time to type your interest into the chat. I also want to say, if you're watching a recording and this question comes up, it is appropriate for you to think about what you are particularly interested in. I suspect it will guide the way that you listen and think through and maybe formulate follow-up questions as you watch this whole training.
And Kyle, I accidentally launched the true-false poll, thinking that was poll 1. You really want people to type in the chat if they had a macro.
Absolutely. I see a couple of notes about 9th grade algebra and a fair amount of general interest, which is a real strength as well, because when we are interested generally, that is a great way for us to sharpen our knowledge, to gather our tools. So whenever we are confronted with a problem, we already have a couple of possible things at our fingers. There, if you can imagine, there is hardly ever only one answer or one solution to your Braille transcription problem. There are multiple solutions within each software program, and there are multiple solutions within each workflow. And I am hopefully going to say it at least 4 more times today. What works for you works. So embrace that there are multiple possibilities here, and please don't let me tell you exactly what to do when something else would work better. So moving on. What is a macro? A macro is a sequence of events, such as keystrokes and mouse clicks, that can be played back to help with repetitive tasks. Another definition is a single instruction that expands automatically into a set of instructions to perform a particular task. I would probably summarize all of that by saying a macro is a shortcut. In thinking about a macro for this talk today, I really thought of a hole punch. So we could take a tiny little compass and trace out the perfectly sized circle and measure from the edges of our paper into the perfect place. And then maybe take some tiny little cuticle scissors and cut out that hole perfectly. Then we would have an opening for a binder ring to go through, and we would have accomplished the same task that a hole punch can do in one squeeze of the handles, because it is a tool designed for a specific task. Now, I did say a minute ago that there is more than one solution to probably any transcription problem that you have, especially if the problem is, how do I get a particular kind of Braille? And I am here to say a somewhat negative spin on that. In some scenarios, there is a solution that is as labor intensive as using a tiny compass and tiny scissors to cut out a hole instead of using a hole punch. I think as we go, we'll find other things that don't require a hole punch, that really the simpler is the better solution. But a macro is a shortcut, a tool that does in one step what without it would take multiple steps. What are some of the things we can do with macros? Something we could do is a restatement maybe of what I just said, which is condense many clicks through menus into a single keyboard command. So in other words, when the option that you want is buried into a menu, if you make a macro that is a recording of digging into that menu and selecting the buried option, why then your macro could be a single click, a single maybe keyboard command. Of course, we can insert text. And I'm going to beat this idea over the head a little. Inserting text could be a big something, like a transcriber's note that you've crafted and you need a couple of times. It could be a small thing too. It could be x squared is the text that you're inserting. Similarly, inserting symbols could be an entire expression that you have gone to the trouble of transcribing once, maybe the Pythagorean theorem, or it could be a single symbol, whether that's a transcriber-defined shape that you've made and defined on your special symbols page, or something that exists in a rule book, which you could go and find and copy and paste, even the print Unicode character, but which you use often enough and doesn't exist elsewhere that it's worth making a little shortcut to insert that symbol. I know this feels snarky, this next slide. What is math? And what are UEB and Nemeth code? They are concepts and writing systems. Math is, quote, the science and study of quality, structure, space, and change. Second point, something like the horizontal and vertical line in print that make up the plus sign, that is not in itself the concept of addition. It is just a symbol that represents that concept or that stands in for a concept. So the math is the concept, and our writing systems, whether it's print or UEB or Nemeth code, use symbols to represent the concepts. So whether it's shape 2 and then the horizontal and vertical line and the 2, or our UEB symbols, which include the numeric indicator before each .2 and the 2-cell plus symbol, because so many of our UEB operation signs start with .5 and then have a a next part of the symbol. In this case, that's 2, 3, 5. Or Nemeth code, where we have our opening and closing Nemeth code switch indicators and our Nemeth code lower numbers 2 and a single cell plus and a 2. All of those are written forms of communication about or of the same concept. You know, we can't move on from mentioning codes without my saying it is best to go to the original source. So for more information about the Nemeth code, always best to go to the Nemeth code itself. In this case, Nemeth code 2022, which is available from BANA's website, that is brailleauthority.org. Or for more information about UEB, including, of course, UEB as used for math and science, it's just the same code extended, it is best to go to the rules of UEB, including guidelines for technical material, all of which are available, including some updates, especially to the guidelines for technical material. And then also available is Rules of UEB 2024 from iceb.org. And ICEB is the International Council on English Braille. All right, have another question for you. And that is, which macro do you think will have the greatest impact on efficiency? A shortcut that, here come your 3 options, inserts the opening and closing codes for a superscript, inserts all parts of a title page for My Fair Lady, or finds all heading 1 styles in a document. Which macro do you think will have the greatest impact on efficiency?
And you will have to put your poll choice in the chat, because the poll question I got from Kyle accidentally was last course. So A, B, or C in the chat.
I see one all of the above, a number of C's, a couple of A's, a B or a C. I'm going to give it one more sec. The majority of you said C. And there is an argument to be made for pretty much, certainly for A and C. Almost no one chose B. Let's talk about what I think it is, and then why it could maybe be the others. I think the macro most likely to increase efficiency is option A, which inserts the opening and closing codes for a superscript, because, well, it depends on how you transcribe. If you already use a keyboard shortcut for the superscript, like in Word, you use the, what is it, Control Plus, then you wouldn't need this macro. However, you are essentially already using a macro for inserting a superscript. If you were working directly in Duxbury and you make a macro, and we'll talk about how there's a little menu where you can make shortcuts in Duxbury, and you make one that inserts what you need to say, hey, what's between these is a superscript, why, you're likely to use that a lot in a, for example, grade 9 algebra transcription. So that is why I think the shortcut that inserts the opening and closing codes for a superscript would have the greatest impact on efficiency, because you would likely use it a lot, certainly more than you would use option B, which is all parts of the title page for My Fair Lady. Now, if you're ever transcribing My Fair Lady, the book or the musical, you're likely to do it one time. And creating a macro that isn't going to extend beyond one job is something we have to ask ourselves, do I really have to do that? Sometimes the answer is yes, but if it's a macro that applies to one job and one page, even if it's in multiple volumes, that one is unlikely to have a big impact. And I know you know that. Then there's the third option, which I think could increase efficiency. The third option is to find all heading 1 styles in a document. And the reason that I wouldn't endorse this one is that if you make a shortcut which finds all of a certain style, all of a certain type of thing in a document, the question becomes, then what? I would probably choose to make a macro that does a specific thing to all of the heading 1 styles. Maybe some of them have bold and some of them don't. And I've thoroughly researched my document and found that they don't need any bold, but my document or my transcription is in multiple files. So I'm going to create a macro to find all the heading ones and remove all bold from them. That way, an entire task is encapsulated in the macro instead of just one step where it leaves me saying, then what? And I did say earlier that there are multiple solutions. So for you to find a certain thing, especially if you have to use maybe a special command or a particular symbol in order to find what you want, why recording just the find all of these step might be what you want so that you can take a look at all of them. If that's the case, I might suggest you highlight or otherwise flag them as part of the macro. But if you're looking for a specific thing and you find them all so you know how many there are and that's the information you need, why, then yeah, sure, C could be your answer. We talked a little about what a macro is and what math is, as well as the writing systems used to represent it. And we talked a little bit about what kind of macros you might make. Okay, let's talk about how, eh? There is one little door in Duxbury that I would describe as a macro maker, a shortcut maker, and it is conveniently named Shortcut Preferences. It's in the global drop-down menu, and when you choose Shortcut Preferences, a pop-up appears with 5 editable fields. Each field is labeled with an uneditable label. And those labels or headings are insert for grade 0. And then there's a parentheses which gives the keyboard shortcut, in this case, Alt 0. Then, if you have 6 boxes in your shortcut preferences, it is likely set up the same way where each little box has a place that you can put the codes you want to be inserted when you press the keyboard shortcut that is in the parentheses of the label for that box. So in the example that I have on the screen, there are 4 other boxes. I'm going to jump to the last option that I have here in my example shortcut preferences. That one currently has the default code, and that is PG. So this forces a new Braille page. And the label for that is insert for new page. Then in parentheses, Control Enter. So Control Enter tells us that's the shortcut, the keyboard shortcut. And we could make that do whatever we wanted. Sorry about that. The dangerous one is the penultimate box, which is labeled Insert for New Line. Enter. So anytime you press Enter, this is the code that will be inserted in Duxbury. And I would never edit this one. Enter forces a hard line break. The code opening angle bracket is a hard line break. And I think that is common enough. We should not change it. Does that make sense? So let me open Duxbury and just go into the global drop down. And the 8th option is shortcut preferences. When I click on that, I get the shortcut preferences pop-up we just looked at. So if I wanted to have some code set, maybe the codes for superscript, okay? So I might put in, so what I did was I went into the editable box and deleted everything in there. Then I'm going to type either F9 or Control open bracket, which is what we have touched on before for entering codes in Duxbury. That's going to give me the little code box with just an opening and closing square bracket. And when I push F9 or Control open bracket, my cursor is between those brackets. I'm going to type first PS, then right arrow, and again, ask Duxbury for a code box by pressing Control open bracket or F9, then type PE. Now I have the set of codes for superscript start and superscript end. Whatever goes between those codes, PS and PE, will be a superscript. So 2 is a very common one, right? But we could also have maybe the word minus or almost anything. For the shortcut, I'm going to leave nothing between the codes. So I can use the keyboard shortcut Alt-0 to get these codes that I just put in the box to go in. When I'm finished editing my desired codes for shortcuts, I press OK, and let's try out what's happening here. I want to make a new file, so I could go File New or Control N. In my File New box, I'm going to choose a transcription template. We've already talked about these. Let's stick with English UEB BANA, which I have previously marked as my default template. And let's stick with a print file, a DXP, because those tend to be most stable and most editable. So maybe I want to simply type X and squared. Now, there are other ways to get a superscript into Duxbury, but it doesn't have the same built-in keyboard functionality as Word, where you might hit Control plus. So instead, I'm going to use Alt-0, which is the shortcut we just set, and then move my cursor back left 1, so I'm in between the codes, and type a 2. Now, if I translate, I had my fingers on Control T, and I was about to whirlwind transcribe instead of telling you what I'm doing. Now we have the letter X. We inserted our PS and PE codes, and we put in between those codes what we want our superscript to be, in this case, the number 2. And now I'm going to translate. I can either hit File, Translate, or press Control T. And what I get is X. Let's make you a little bit bigger there, friend. What I get is X, grade 1 symbol indicator, superscript indicator number 2. That's perfect. I did see a question as I was talking about codes. Where is the list of codes located? So some of the slides in the handout for this session include codes in a different, maybe more explanatory format than this other resource, which I'm about to show you, that is part of the Duxbury Help menu. In the Duxbury Help menu, if we go to simply Help Topics under Help, and under Templates, Styles, and Codes, in the resulting Contents tab, if we expand that, and then expand the choice codes, the 5th document option is all capitals, DBT Codes Quick Reference. If I open that, then what comes is a little introductory text, and then an alphabetized table of available DBT codes, which has 2 columns, the first of which is the code and its description, and then a link to a page with more information about that code, if such a thing is available. I love that this resource is also available online, so I'm gonna over answer this question just a little and say, what if we go to duxburysystems.com and then in the link for the product that we have, either DBT Win or DBT for Mac, if we scroll down, we're going to find general documentation with a few links. Predictably, my favorite link is for DBT Win, Duxbury DBT online documentation English. And then we are back in the same contents that we looked at in the help file of Duxbury. So we can go to templates, styles, and codes. And then under the codes option, we could scroll way down, or at this point, we could search for quick, just simply the word quick, and that would take us to it. But under the bullet codes, we can choose DBT codes quick reference, and there is a big, big list. There is that big table list of codes. And we did talk more about codes and sort of where they come from and how you know in previous webinars. So we changed one of our shortcuts in Duxbury, and we made the keyboard combo Alt-0 give us the codes PS, PE. That's the way that I would say Duxbury lets you make macros. What about the other programs that we might use? Oh, you know what? Let's make one more. Let's make one more. Oh, yes, we're good. Let's say I have a lot of superscripts and I have a lot of lovely algebraic fractions, which have a variety of complex statements as their numerator, and then maybe a variety of things as denominators. And so what I want are the codes for fractions to be put in all at once for me. So I might search that DBT codes quick reference for the word fraction. And then I might adjust my shortcut preferences and choose to make the keyboard combo Alt F7, which is my second editable box. I'm going to omit what's there and then put in the codes for fraction start, fraction line, and fraction end. Control open bracket FS, right arrow, control open bracket FL, right arrow, control open bracket FE. Okay to save. Now I might be looking at my print and I have a whole A plus B plus C plus D over E plus F plus G plus H. And I say, oh, goodness gracious, I just want to put that in. I think it was Alt F7. Let's try it and find out. Hey, it was. So now I can say, look, between the FS and the FL, now I have my numerator that's A plus B plus C plus D. And then my denominator, the thing on the bottom is a denominator, is E plus F plus G plus H. So if I transcribe with Control T, then we should get in UEB an opening general fraction indicator with a grade 1 symbol indicator before it. Then our series of the numerator, A plus B plus C plus D, and our general fraction line, and E plus F plus G plus H, and then a closing general fraction indicator, which is preceded by a grade 1 indicator. We're going to look again at another complex, relatively complex statement or expression and talk about grade 1. But this transcription is accurate. It's not the most graceful application of grade 1 mode, but it is accurate, simply using grade 1 in each place where it's necessary. So what if I want to make a macro for something in Duxbury that I am not already familiar with, that I can't just say, yes, I know exactly what the fraction codes are. Well, I think I mentioned this, yeah, briefly in the previous installation of this 4-part series, but we can type in the Braille that we want in a DXB or a Duxbury Braille document, right? And then translate from there. And sometimes that reveals really helpful codes. So I might have something. Oh, I see some great questions about DBT macros. We are going to do those next. Let's say I know what dots I want for something straightforward, A with a bar over it, but I want a code for those. So I type in the dots in my Braille document and then translate, and I'm likely to get a warning message that says, you are attempting to translate a file which appears to have been translated already. Continue. In this case, I am aware that this Braille file came from my playing around with my shortcuts for inserting codes. And I am not going down a rabbit hole that I won't be able to get out of. So I'm going to say, yes, please continue. And what I end up seeing is my capital A preceded by the code E and followed by the code bar. So I could translate from here again, and I recommend you play around with it this way. I will again get a warning pop up. You can tell Duxbury do not display this warning again, but I actually like it, so I don't do that. And when I translate, I get exactly those dots that I wanted for A with a bar over it. Love it. So now I know about the code bar and the code E. I could go to my codes quick reference and read up on what those do and then use them elsewhere. Relatedly, here comes a question. Here comes a question to one of the answers that you typed in the chat. Wait, scratch that. Reverse it. The question was, is there a way to make fraction codes for a simple fraction like 1/2? I'm so glad you asked. The answer, my friend, is absolutely. They are exactly the same. If we simply use FS, FL, and FE, we put 1 as our numerator between FS and FL, and 2 as our denominator between FL and FE. Why? Duxbury said, do you want to translate from here? It's okay, Duxbury, I do. We get the numeric fraction. 1 numeric fraction line and 2. And there we are. So the FS, FL, FE, they work for many different kinds of fractions. Our simple numeric fractions, our general fractions, and if used in a file with a Nemeth code template, they work for Nemeth code as well. Another question was, can you only have 5 macros at a time in Duxbury? Well, I'm going to give you a spoiler about something we'll touch on in a little bit, which is there are third-party macro recording programs that you could use to record more macros, but that is not a native Duxbury tool, and that is not something I expect us to talk about in detail today. So I might say the answer is yes, within Duxbury, beyond the tools that are already available, which include a number of shortcuts or macros. You have 5 or maybe 6, depending upon your version, that you could make for a keyboard shortcut, unless you use a third-party program. That is not something you wrote, not something Duxbury wrote, but another service. Yeah. Okay, we talked about translate to discover, and we translated from something we entered using 6-key entry in order to discover what codes Duxbury associates with that. Okay. push the pause button, push the stop button, push the eject button. We are changing topics. We're still making a macro, but now we're making it in Word. And you are probably sick of me saying this, but Word is a multi-billion dollar program or company. And so the tools available are for a larger audience than Duxbury really is, and also have many articles and stuff written about them. So there is lots of real whole world support for making macros in Word. Sometimes that's too much, but you can look this up. You can even go to the Windows help file for create or run a macro. And there's a tool for recording lots of steps in Word. And in short, that's on whatever tab you can find it on, because we know we can change which tabs are available in the ribbon of Word. In my current setup, my View tab is what has the macros options, and I can view macros that I currently have, and I can record macro. When I choose to record a macro, it comes up with a form to fill out, where first I name my macro, and I would, of course, name it something descriptive. I find it very tempting to name these things like Alan or Joan. However, something more like style 1-3 is probably going to be most useful for you. The next part of this record macro form is assign macro to button or keyboard. There's an argument to be made for both, and the workflow that works for you is the one that works. So a button is going to appear somewhere on your toolbar of Word or anywhere else you can sneak it in. A keyboard means you're going to assign a combination of key presses, sometimes called a chord, C-H-O-R-D, to the macro. So you can either assign a keyboard shortcut or you can make a button, which will be a part of your Word controls, probably in your toolbar. Where to store the macro, you could store it in a specific document, or you could store it in all documents as part of the normal template, and that's fine. You can write a description if you want. Sometimes this is a great place to practice or put into words for yourself or for future you what your macro is doing. I called this macro style 1-3, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. And I want to use it to get into the the Braille template in Word and just sign the paragraph style 1-3. So I'm just going to say assign or apply paragraph style 1-3. That's my description. And I then have a cassette tape, an audio cassette tape attached to my cursor. Now, every click that I click, like every menu choice that I make, and every keyboard stroke will be recorded. Now, just like spatial math problems are difficult to put into a transcription software program, it is impossible for the macro recorder to record my visual clicking around. So let's say I try to find the center of the page and like double click to get my cursor there. That's not it. That's not the kind of thing our macro can record. The macro recorder is going to record menu choices, things that we know you could do with keyboard controls, and also keystrokes on the keyboard. I'm actually going to pause my macro recording. We're currently hoping to make a macro that applies the style 1-3. But girl, I had not set myself up for this macro yet because I hadn't attached any kind of Duxbury template. And it is with Duxbury templates that styles become available in the Braille tab. So I paused my recording so I could come to the Braille tab for this document, and then in my document group, choose template. Let's continue with the BANA UEB theme. So I've chosen the BANA UEB template. Duxbury is loading. There we go. Now I've got a group called paragraph styles in my Braille tab. And that's where I'm going to find something like the numbered style, excuse me, indent at 1, run over at 3. This is the point where I confess to you that I make this macro because I get a little like Jackson Pollock maybe when I'm transcribing quickly and I know that I want the 1-3 style. I don't always have the patience of mouse movement or the patience of keyboard clicking to say, oh, okay, I'm going into my Braille tab and then I'm going into my paragraph styles and then I'm going down to indent at 1 and run over at 3. Whew, I just slide and choose something else, or I get bored halfway through my keyboard clicks and don't follow through, which is why it's important for me to have this particular macro be a recorded step. Let's go back to our view tab so we can resume recorder. Now, Word, record my selection of the Braille tab, record my selection of the drop-down numbered, and then my choice of 1 and my choice of 3. That's it. That's all I really need the macro to do, is apply that style. So I'm going to stop it recording now. But you might remember that I did not assign a button or a keyboard combination to that macro. So how am I going to activate it? Not scripted. I don't know how. I would have to try again, which is something that I tell my child to do on a really regular basis. Okay. So I'm going to do it faster this time and try not to talk too much through it. I'm going to say short commands. I want a macro that applies style 1-3. I have a template from Duxbury attached to this document, so I'm ready with my paragraph styles. View tab, macros, record macro, macro name, style 1-3. Assign macro to keyboard. Do you want to replace the existing macro? Yes, please, Word. I messed up and I'm trying again. Control 1-3, all at once. Assign, close. Now I am recording. Braille tab, numbered 1-3. Stop recording. So now what if I had something else that has a style and I said, actually, that needs to be 1-3. My keyboard shortcut is Control 1-3. Ta-da! I saw a little conversation in the chat about how this might be something that will be allowed because it is native right in Word. It might be allowed by your school district or your organization's security settings. And I hope and expect that is true. So I did see one other positive note in the chat that I'd like to share with the rest of us, that a person says they use word macros extensively and can attest you can do almost anything you want with VBA. Little nerd glasses moment, the language that macros are recorded in. So doing those recordings is you're writing computer script, but you're doing it by performing the action and letting Word record the action and then write a computer script that captures what you've done. I already touched on if you want to use multiple programs, that is a whole nother level of shortcut making or of macro making. And there are third-party programs that can do that. Yeah, that can open from one program and choose a certain area to copy and then move to another software program to paste in or whatever you need to do. That is beyond the scope of what we're doing today, but I never want to imply to you that there is a limit, right? The sky is the limit. Please continue on and continue exploring, while also always remembering you are the person who is using Duxbury in the full context of who you are, what you know, where you are, what your goal is. And that is individual for each of us, right? So in addition to you are the one using Duxbury, it's good for that to evolve and change as you learn new things or as your real world context changes and maybe your computer gets updated. And last note about you using Duxbury. It also means that you are a person who can talk about this with other people. And even when both people have the same level of expertise about like recording macros, you can problem solve together and come up with novel to both of you ways to utilize the tools that you both know about. So maybe I'm saying you could be in the cockpit of Duxbury, being one heck of a pilot, and you can have a co-pilot and have some help brainstorming and remembering and forming new solutions. What if it's broken? Hey, do you guys remember when I recorded that macro for 1.3 initially and I didn't make any selections about how to activate or run the macro? Well, that's one way that a macro could be broken. Other ways are your security settings, whether you've set them or a larger organization has set them, might not allow macros. This is certainly the primary cause of broken macros or any shortcut that comes up when you Google for help. If you have access to the permissions, you may get help within your system, whether it's Windows or Mac, by searching enable macros, that is, make them possible, or allow macros. If you have full access to your security settings in Word, you can enable macros by going into the Trust Center, which is under Options, and opening another pop-up called Trust Center Settings, and then selecting the macro option that's going to work for you. Always remembering that next to downloading fonts, running a macro from someone else is one of the fastest ways to a security breach and destruction in your computer. So we try to do very little sharing of macros. Certainly, we don't accept macros from unknown parties. And I know you know that, and it's worth saying. I see that someone asked a question about Duxbury recognizing macros created by Word. I think the answer is no. So if you record a set of steps in Word, those are recorded in and can only be replayed in Word. Nonetheless, Duxbury opens Word files quite well. And especially with the Braille tab, which we've talked about in previous webinars, you can set up your Word file to do pretty much, to take advantage of pretty much every Duxbury tool that is available. So while you cannot run a Word macro in Duxbury, running a Word macro within Word can allow you to set up a Word file, so Duxbury will do a certain thing. How else can your macro be broken? Well, you may have placed your cursor or be in a certain document that isn't what the macro was created for. So this is kind of an example. For the 1-3 apply style macro that we made, if I had selected my entire document and then I executed that macro, well, it certainly wouldn't do what I wanted. If I wanted just one paragraph made into 1-3, it would make everything into 1-3 because that's what it was recorded to do. But if I start with my entire document highlighted and then execute a macro that applies style 1-3, why, it's just going to do what it's programmed to do. Another example is if you choose to make a macro that maybe is supposed to replace text that's highlighted, but you run the macro before you highlight the text you want replaced, why, your macro doesn't have its appropriate starting point and can't do exactly what you want. And then the most common, I think, the most tempting is that when you record a macro and you might record it in a certain headspace where you've been holding on your clipboard, for example, the superscript Duxbury codes for a long time. And so when you Control V, when you recorded the macro, why, it would paste in the superscript codes. However, when you run that macro a couple of days later after editing a digital birthday card to your niece, what's on your clipboard might be different. And so the macro will only follow the instructions it's been given, which, if it was Control V or paste, will paste whatever was on your clipboard. And maybe that is Janice is the best, because that's what you had copied to paste into a couple of places in the project you were just working on. I think of this as Bugs Bunny reaching up where you see only the arm and hand coming out of Bugs Bunny's underground digging hole. And there's a little burp, burp, as his hand pats the ground around the opening of his hole, looking for what is available. If you have told your macro to paste something, then it's probably not a macro that's going to work very often, unless your macro also records the action of copying something. The whole task encapsulated in the macro. Similarly, if you tell your macro to use another macro and that one has been deleted or otherwise isn't allowed or won't run, it's the same problem where you've told your macro to get something that isn't available where it's reaching for it. All that leading to a boombox with 2 tapes where we might record from one tape to another. And I suspect not everyone here has made a mixtape by recording from one tape to another or from the radio onto a tape. I'm here to tell you it takes many tries to do that right and really get everything to align the way that you want. Even if you've never used a boombox, you probably know doing something in a way that is step perfect so that it's exactly the same way you want it done every time in the future takes many tries. And there is no shame in trying many times. No shame in writing down your steps or maybe making an audio recording of yourself talking to yourself about which steps you need to do to make the appropriate recording. Or, are you ready for it? Anything else that works for you. Okay, let's let you give a little input, give a little thought. True or false? you should assign your word macro to a keyboard shortcut instead of assigning it to a button on the toolbar. A for true, B for false, or T for true, F for false. That's a false. Ooh, specifically do what works for you. False, 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 false. Yes. True and false. I'll give you one more sec. Yeah. Oh, you guys. Absolutely. I thought you got it. True and false, or neither. Whatever works for you is what you should do. Before we let go of word macros entirely, I saw a couple of comments from today's audience that I'd like to share with others. One of those is, it is a rabbit hole. Sometimes you can spend more time making the macro than it would have taken you to perform the task the number of times you needed. And that's true, which is part of why I say macros are best used for a task that can extend to multiple projects, something you can use all the time instead of just in one specific document. So beware the rabbit hole. I know it's tempting. Also, we can all give ourselves a little grace to go down a rabbit hole, spend more time than was perfectly productive, especially if we learned something along the way. Sometimes going down the rabbit hole is good in the long run. Just watch out. Please don't get stuck in the rabbit hole forever, always designing macros and never transcribing. We definitely want you to transcribe. The other note that I want to share with the rest of us that one of our participants today generously shared is they spend a lot of time in equation editor within Microsoft Word and then opening the file in Duxbury. Dear Word, please let me just have a new line and then go maybe in my setup, my insert tab includes the equation editor. I think that's right. And the equation tab or math type are also a series of macros that are native, that are already recorded by the software writers. And you could record a macro of using those tools as well. As we just said, please avoid rabbit holes. You don't have to. And if you find yourself using, I don't know, inserting a radical and then adjusting the index and doing that in multiple steps throughout your entire workflow, perhaps that's a series of steps worth recording so you have just one click, one key press to do that. Thank you again to those who shared in today's session the little bit of insight into their own experience. All right. I want us to look at some Braille dots and to talk about some specifics. Because we said that today's session is about math and macros. I'm going to back up for 1 second, though, and say equation editor is not the same as math type. I'm sure that Willow Free or a software engineer could give you a more complete answer as to why those two things are not the same. They can be related, and there's great software magic happening in the background of both, as well as the way that any way you get math into your Word document then communicates with Duxbury. But again, equation editor and math type are not exactly the same. They're not quite the same. Oh, I wish I could give you a more complete answer about what uses which markup language, but I won't, not today. So I want us to talk about the slope formula because it has a fraction and also some subscripts. Remember when we looked at superscripts earlier? This is definitely related. So the slope formula could be stated as rise over run. Hey, that's a fraction. Hey, we know some codes for that. Equals the fraction y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. In Braille, I'm going to resist the urge to talk through every dot of these transcriptions because they're interesting and lovely. Feel free to pause, take a moment, but we're going to move on. This is how I would code that a statement I just said in Duxbury. I would work in a Duxbury print file. I would use the fraction codes for both of my fractions, one on the left of the equal sign and one on the right of the equal sign. And then I would also use BS and BE. Since we looked at superscript codes earlier, and we know this formula has subscripts, I think you've probably already made the connection that BS and BE surround something that is a subscript. The other things I would use probably in transcribing that slope formula we talked about is the style 1-3. Of course, for my formatting, I might use something else depending upon where this formula falls and if it needs blank lines, but let's not get carried away. The actual screenshot of my Duxbury program that I shared with you uses the paragraph style 1-3 for this formula. And that means that if I have any runovers, there'll be 2 cells to the right of the first line of that paragraph. We already talked about the fraction codes. I might also use a soft return, which can be made with the combination of Duxbury codes L, meaning new line, but within the same paragraph, and run, meaning what comes after this is a runover. We already talked about the subscript codes. And then there are 2 exciting pairs of codes. Well, pair codes and a style. I had to play around with this quite a bit to make sure that I could get the grade 1 indicators that I wanted in a UEB transcription. And then using the same set of styles and codes that I could get the code switch indicators that I need in a Nemeth transcription. Now, having put all of that together, what parts of the slope formula might we make into macros? This isn't exactly a poll. You don't have to type anything into the chat. Maybe never-ending story style, you could shout it out a window. What is your answer to in writing this slope formula? What parts of putting that together might you make into a macro or a shortcut? There's always more that I want to share. And that includes a repeat of what are some things we can do with macros. I think we've covered that pretty well. We could insert things. We could make many clicks, like choosing a style that's buried in a menu into a single click. We could insert symbols in a way that works for us, right? We have, I know every Duxbury group of people always wants to talk more about codes. I want to make sure that we thoroughly cover the codes we have talked about today. For a fraction, any kind of linear fraction. Did you notice how I didn't say the spatially arranged ones, like that we get at the very beginning of fraction instruction? Or sometimes we get spatially arranged fractions when they are many nested levels deep, a fraction within a fraction within a fraction. For those, we're going to use spatial arrangement. But for most fractions, we're going to use a linear, just across the Braille line format. And our Duxbury codes for that are fraction start, or FS, fraction line, or FL, and fraction end, or FE. Hey, there's a picture of pi on here because we always use that to illustrate the idea of fractions. And if you want a little extra whipped cream on your pie, please let me, and you are a Nemeth transcriber, you can go look at the FL code in the Duxbury Braille Translator codes quick list and see that there is an additional piece of information you could add to the fraction line code to say that this is a slash fraction line, as opposed to the perfectly print horizontal one. Let's see. Before I get too far away from the chat, I want to make sure we didn't miss anything. More just discussion about how to use Word for transcribing math. And the big takeaway that I would make here is if you're making a decision about software or process, let's all support each other in always checking the resulting Braille. That's our guiding star, right? That is our consistent melody line is, does it give accurate Braille? And if I tweak this part of it, is the Braille remaining accurate? And I know that kind of proofreading is challenging and might be the thing that you need a break from. You might go down the rabbit hole of making macros and find they're amazing and really rewarding, but really struggle to have the energy for all the proofreading necessary. I would say again, any community support you can get for really checking that your Braille is accurate each time, and each time as you adjust your process. Efficiency is wonderful, but efficiency that leads to inaccurate Braille is an insult to all of us. And I don't mean like me and my little team. I mean, we all deserve accurate Braille. Those of us who are making, checking, reading, using as best we can, we want to check the resulting Braille. Whew. Can you tell that's a soapbox for me? I appreciate we're coming close to our end time, and I don't want to ignore your thirst for codes by going too fast. So I'm going to say one more set of them and then make sure that we cover the last couple pieces. We already talked about superscripts and subscripts. So superscript codes are PS and then PE, and subscript codes are BS and then BE. Now, for better and worse, we often talk about subscripts and superscripts in the same breath that we talk about modifiers, something that happens directly over or directly below the base material. And when that's the case, there are different Duxbury codes for something that happens like directly above or directly below. Those codes are different from the codes for superscript and subscript because this is a different type of material. And we should and will talk here also about modified letters, like an A with an accent over it. That is different from these kinds of like math modifiers. Anyway, the codes for modifiers we glimpsed earlier with our A bar. And you might remember that there are really specific rules for just a bar over a single letter, and that's why there's a code that's just bar. If we have something for which there isn't a guidelines for technical material section 12, specific symbol and rule for, or even if there is, we can often use this set of codes in Duxbury, which is E, and then OS and OE with something between for a modifier that is directly over. Or E with US and UE for a modifier that is directly below. And you guessed it, these work in a UEB context, that is the English UEB BANA template, or the English UEB basic, or the English UEB UK formatting. And these codes, like the fraction code or the super or subscript, also work in a UEB with Nemeth context or template. Now, modified letters are something that many of them already have a quote macro or a keyboard shortcut for inserting in Word. So for acute accents, you can always press Control apostrophe and then the letter that you want that acute accent to be on. Did you hear me? I just said always. I said you can always press Control apostrophe and then let go of that and type the letter you want to have this acute or slanting up and to the right accent. And we know that's not true. Nothing is always true. So one way to enter a modified letter is to use a keyboard combination that already exists, especially in Word, and that is something that the whole world needs to do often. And so you can find great information about what those existing keyboard shortcuts for modified letters are. You can find good information about that in a simple internet search. Or, no, Kyle, move on. Okay. I have another question for you. Which is the most likely reason that a macro would not work? A, the file was not saved. B, it includes a step of copy/paste that is not part of the macro. Or C, it was not cooked al dente. The most likely reason that a macro would not work. File not saved, copy paste that's not part of the macro, or it was not cooked al dente. I appreciate every C. Spoiler, a macro is not a kind of pasta. And so it cannot be cooked al dente or overcooked to mushiness. I'm going to give you one more sec. All right, lots of B's and quite a few A's. In fact, that file that I made, the 1.3 style, I never saved that. You can make a macro, you can use a macro in a file that hasn't been saved in your working file. Now, if you're talking about the macro file not being saved, I mean, you'd be right. But most of the time, the act of making a macro, it won't let you leave until you have saved or said okay or stopped running the macro. So anyway, you can use a macro in any kind of working file. I would say the most likely reason a macro isn't working is that it includes a step of copy paste that's not part of the macro. And we talked a little bit about this earlier with the analogy of having your clipboard in your computer still having text from when you worked on a digital card or an e-card to your niece, or nibbling. And yes, okay, we already talked about macro is it's a shortcut, not a pasta. I think we have at least 2 minutes if you have a question that we really haven't answered, though I appreciate our audience today is mostly generally interested in this topic. I did see a little more discussion about how it is often best to just directly enter the math if you know it. And I would say I hear you, and a lot of transcribers feel similarly. And I know that a good friend of mine and I were a good friend of mine who really is one of the luminaries of Braille math said, I don't use a lot of macros and shortcuts. I do enter most of my math directly. And I still use a couple of shortcuts that I've made that probably end up saving me a week every year cumulatively over the year. And that's because this person made shortcuts that do things like enter the opening and closing Nemeth code indicators, or apply a style that it would otherwise take just a few seconds to go and pull out of a menu. And so even if you're entering your math directly, you deserve to have a little bit more time back. So if some of these, if even just recording one little thing might, I hope, give you back a little bit more time to stare at a beautiful dandelion or realize that you are old enough to recognize a bird call, even though you didn't mean to start bird watching. All right, we are almost at our end time. There's some really interesting information about Unicode and how it relates to refreshable Braille displays and the rules of UEB 2024. That information about Unicode is in the preface of Rules of UEB 2024, as well as the acknowledgements. So you can do some follow-up reading in the Rules of UEB 2024 about Unicode. These are some repeats of something we went over last time about page numbers and a code for placement of page numbers. For further reading as well, there's good information in the Duxbury documentation about custom templates. If you have the same, especially small, I think, jobs that you do again and again, you can have some embedded text and files that already exist in a custom template you've built on a general Duxbury template. And always use your community, which includes professional development organizations wherever you are. Oh yeah, we're still a couple minutes away from our end. So please let me pick your brain. For this question, you have 4 options. The question is, which of the following sets are the codes for a superscript in Duxbury Braille Translator? First option, A, E-O-S-O-E. Answer choice B, E-U-S-U-E. Answer choice C, P-S-P-E. Answer choice D, B-S-B-E. Which one of those is the codes for a superscript in Duxbury? C, 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 C. Oh, you guys, thank you for answering quickly and for paying such close attention. Yes, the superscript codes are PS and PE. So today we were meant to, 1, describe at least 2 reasons why a macro may not work. 2, take material from a file prepared for either UEB with Nemeth or UEB Math/Science and use it to prepare a file for the other. We didn't fully explore that one, I will admit. So please take any time you have to revisit the idea of the math style for Duxbury. And then just go to sleep with a happy little reminder on your pillow that the fraction codes, the superscript codes, the subscript codes, however you're getting your math in, will likely work for Duxbury in a UEB template. And then the same setup can work for a Nemeth environment as well. And last objective, transcribe a fraction that includes a superscript using Duxbury codes. Could you do that? Would you like to try? You could do it now, either in your full Duxbury or even in the demo version of Duxbury, transcribing a fraction that includes a superscript using codes. I respect your 6-key entry skills, and our codes can make it go faster and make it more versatile to go into different Braille translation tables. Again, I'm Kyle. My email is kdejute@aph.org. And my amazing teammates at APH do monitor these YouTube videos for comments, and we often catch those and get back to them there as well. There are other parts of this series. I think you know that. The whole series is called Duxbury Braille Translator, from first paddle to flocking flying. You can search that a couple of different places and hopefully find all parts of this series. Flocking flying. Oh, bonus content is when you get the handout.
Thank you so much, Kyle. It has been amazing to again dig into my Braille code brain and see some of these wonderful macros that could even speed me up in my print work in Word. Ooh.